Resident Evil 7 is truly one of the most remarkable games in recent memory. It managed to breathe new life into a series that was sort of suffering from an identity crisis. The survival horror gameplay that Resident Evil originally had was back, and with all sorts of modern enhancements. And now I had known about this series for a very long time, but when 7 came out, it felt like I was living through a freaking renaissance. I heard nothing but love for that game, and even though I wasn't interested in playing the game or its predecessors at the time, I couldn't help but find it really awesome to hear about. Fast forward 4 years later, and here I am. I played the game myself. It's one I never thought I'd ever play, but I did. I played a whole bunch of other ones too, but they're not important. And honestly, I loved playing through it. It's not without its issues, of course. There's some silly stuff I'll get to mention later, but still a borderline S-tier game nonetheless. And so, a brand new age of the survival horror franchise had begun. And then it became an action series again. Yeah, it's so weird for 7's recently released sequel to take a similar direction to Resident Evil 4. It probably has something to do with a bunch of people who played 7 being pussies. A reception for Resident Evil Village has kind of been all over the place. Some people love it, others don't like the shift in gameplay, and there are plenty of dudes out there who just think it's kind of alright. Personally, I had about as much fun with Village as I did with 7, which just led me to an interesting question. Which one better? Yeah, I know a lot of people have been comparing Village to 4 instead, which I totally understand, but I don't really find comparing the two to be all that interesting. Like, let me just quickly say, 4 beats it. I just like the weapons more, and Village has some stuff I don't really like that we'll get into later. So yeah, I know it sounds completely insane to instead compare Village to the game that it's a sequel to, but that's what I'm gonna do. Let me just preface this by saying, this is obviously not objective in any way whatsoever. This is just for fun. I had a great time playing through both of these games, and I plan on giving them their own standalone videos in the future alongside various other Resident Evil games. So anyway, let's go. You know, it's always kind of weird talking about the story stuff when doing these kinds of videos. Especially when covering a series like this where the stories are either mid as frick or so freaking ridiculous that you could take a 14-year-old talking about politics more seriously. But 7 is actually a rather weird exception. Its story is not the best thing ever, but it's surprisingly solid and interesting. Slowly descending into the Baker's residence in search of Ethan's long-lost wife, and over time realizing the screwed up stuff going on around here filled me with more dread than any other opening in the franchise. And uncovering the origins of the mold and what happened to the Baker family to make them into the way they are now was really exciting, for me at least. In Village, you collect the jars of piss. Okay, unfortunately, Village finds itself stuck in both of the categories I mentioned earlier. It manages to be just kinda serviceable while also having really dumb moments. But it's not even like they're funny dumb moments. They're just dumb. Now, God forbid I go into spoiler territory when talking about a Resident Evil game, so I'm not going to say anything spoiler related about this. But one thing that was really intriguing building up to the release of the game was how Chris Redfield was portrayed. Chris has been an iconic character since the series' roots, so to see him in this almost antagonistic light was kind of off-putting. Like, what happened here? Why'd he kidnap Ethan's daughter? Well, let me tell you right now, the answer is very disappointing, even with my low standards. Also, I didn't really think the new characters were all that great. A common point of praise with 7 is the Baker family. They might just be my favorite villains in the whole series. I mean, remember the part where Louisiana man hijacks your car? That was so epic. And the best part about them isn't just that both Jack and Lucas are funny, it's that deep underneath you begin to understand, wait, this was actually a normal family at one point. That cutscene near the end of the game with Ethan talking to him and the weird hive mind thing, like, man, that's one of my favorite cutscenes in any game ever. Actually, now that I think about it, Village's last few cutscenes are pretty good too, but we're not going to get into those. As for Village's villains, they're alright, I suppose, but the Four Lords don't hold a candle to the Bakers. I know humanity reached a new low over Lady Dimitrescu, but I'ma be honest, I didn't really care for her that much. As a character, she's fine, and as a pursuer, she has so little presence that they really shouldn't have even bothered. Adana and Angie are interesting, but they don't get much screen time. Moreau's actually kinda funny. He looks really creepy, but it's hilarious when you find out how pathetic he really is. Plus, he seems to be an avid Taco Bell enjoyer. Heisenberg is no doubt my favorite. He has more involvement in the game's story, and I love his personality and voice actors so much. Like, the fact that he's so opposed to Miranda just gives him more depth than literally everybody else. Speaking of Miranda, she poses the very interesting question of who cares? Take the blandest RE antagonist you can think of and strip them of any mildly notable trait you can think of, and you have Miranda. At the very least, outside of the villains, we do have our boy, the Duke. He may be built like a Discord moderator, but he most certainly doesn't act like one. I was so surprised that they actually got our shopkeeper for this game involved in the game's story. I love his dialogue, and to be honest, I know this might be blasphemous, but I think I like him more than RE4's merchant. He's a great character. I didn't expect to like him as much as I did. Oh, and also there's Ethan. I mean, I think he's bland. A lot of people think he's bland. He's definitely better in Village, but they also tried to give him some quips like Leon, and I don't think it worked out very well. After the Lady D fight, I full-on expected him to unironically say ratio. Anyway, even with characters such as the Duke, I think this category has a very clear winner. A7's story and characters win by a sizable margin. Village still has its redeeming attributes in this department, but I'd like to think that nobody's really going to get into a hot debate over this anyway. Talking about the gameplay is going to be really tricky. Like I said earlier, 7 is a survival horror game. Resource management and exploration is the name of the game here. But, Luggo, that's not actually the name of the game. A Village, on the other hand, has those elements, but it's definitely more of an action-adventure game. However, while they may have their differences, they still have their similarities. I don't think you can tell, but, well, they're both first-person shooters. A 7 typically puts you in tight spaces with only a few enemies. This can make for claustrophobic and tense situations where you have to carefully decide how you want to handle each enemy encounter. And the fact that the game is first-person means that you have to keep your aim steady so you don't miss shots and waste your precious ammo. One time I completely whiffed a grenade, and man, that was kinda like, oh shoot, that sucks. Village though, well, you literally get money and other items for killing enemies, so that means that you should just kill everybody. I mean, that's kind of fun. Yeah, in Village you get thrown into a wide variety of areas to fight enemies, and there are more enemy types in general. It's a good time. The game works completely differently to 7, so it's fine for you to literally kill every enemy in the game. But of course, you can't go willy-nilly using all of your shotgun or magnum ammo and whatnot. There's still some conservation there. Wow, who would have thought that the action in an action game would be more fun than action in a game that specifically encourages you to conserve ammo. Okay, but for realsies though, both of these approaches fit their respective games very well. A one knock at 7 though, at certain points, and especially near the end, it likes to have a ton of enemies on screen at once and turn into a dumb action game. Seriously, during the final gauntlet at the end of the game, I had way more ammo than I knew what to do with, so I just casually headshotted everything in my way with the shotgun. See, 7's gunplay isn't bad, it's really good actually, but it doesn't work when you have a dumb enemy rush where you're fighting the same 2 enemies you've been killing throughout the entire game. More on that point later. Anyway, I must say that I absolutely adore 7's weapons. That one broken shotgun you can fix up with a repair kit only holds like 2 shots, but that's all it needs to destroy everything in its path. The grenade launcher only has 2 ammo types unfortunately, and in this game I never really find many opportunities to use it effectively, but whenever I do get to fire this thing, it's the most satisfying feeling in the world. The grenade launchers are my favorite weapon types in the series, and none of them feel quite as great as this one. Sure, weapons like the machine gun are kinda lame, but with the ones I've just mentioned, I always get so excited whenever I find the excuse to shoot with one of them. Now, with all that said, you'd think that the more action-focused game would have nothing but pure bliss whenever it comes to its weapons, but that's sadly not the case. Oh, don't get me wrong, I do like the weapons in this game for the most part, but I do have my gripes. Okay, first off, the handguns feel great. I love the sounds and reload animation. Very, very good. The sniper rifle is fun, and popping heads with it feels like you're blowing up a watermelon. But then there's the shotguns, which feel alright, but they definitely don't feel as great as 7's magnificent M21. Like, I don't know, whenever I use one of these on a standard enemy, I typically try to get a quick kill with a headshot, but that simply doesn't happen as often in this game due to there being very few heads that can be blown clean off. Without context, I'm beginning to sound like a maniac. And let me just tell you right now, there's nothing more unsatisfying than using a shotgun in one of these games to get a headshot and not getting your coveted headshot. You know, I guess it's about time I talked about some other things regarding gameplay, such as... So the areas in these games can usually make or break it for me. They're pretty inconsistent whenever it comes to level quality. Typically the best area is either the first or second one. After that it falls off a bit due to later areas being shorter or smaller in general. Now let me tell you right now that the main house in 7 is in my top 3 locations in the whole series. I love both the first and second visit to it, and every room is recognizable and detailed, and that's what really makes an RE area in my opinion. So while the things I just said applies to most of the other good areas in the series, I think the first person perspective gives this one in particular an edge. Exploring this area for the first time was freaking magical. Also, I feel like this is a point that a lot of people never touch on when talking about this game, but the item placement in the house, as well as most of the game in general, is amazing. Now, that might be an overstatement, but I loved how I could walk through a hallway 5 times, and on that last visit, I'll notice some handgun bullets hidden under a shelf or something. There are so many extra items hidden in nooks and crannies that it just adds so much to the already great exploration. I kinda wish Village did more of that. I mean, most of the items are just lying around in the open, though occasionally you'll find a treasure hanging on the ceiling, so that's kinda cool, I guess. The Bughouse is pretty solid too, and so is Old McDonald's big, boomy fun house, but neither of them come close to being as good as the main house. Now, I am aware that I completely brushed over that one, funny part in 7, but we'll save that one for later. Now, Village's areas are kind of all over the place. The namesake of the game, the village itself, is pretty fun to explore though. Revisiting certain parts of the map whenever you have a new tool to get some extra supplies is always fun. Plus, while I did do plenty of optional stuff on my first playthrough, I actually kept on finding more and more stuff on repeat playthroughs. I always appreciate stuff like that. As for the castle, this part is really fun, if a tad too linear. Despite its restrictive structure though, I think a lot of the rooms here are gorgeous and are designed pretty well to make for some fun combat sections. The dollhouse is great, especially on your first playthrough. The reservoir though is pretty whatever. Now, I've never played Uncharted, so I don't get a say-so as to whether or not it's Uncharted, but I mean, it's just Uncharted, man. And the factory can get away with being straightforward because this has some of the most fun combat in the game. I love the Soldat enemies. They're really intimidating and require precise shots to defeat, and on top of that, there are so many different variations of the enemy. Speaking of which, this singular area probably has more enemy variety than the entirety of 7. Hey, you know, that last point actually reminded me of something. Okay, so obviously if we're going to judge the qualities of these two games, we gotta talk about the cringe stuff too. Oh, Resident Evil 7, I hate to do this to you because you're a borderline S-tier amazing masterpiece game, but I'm doing this out of love. Okay, so when talking about RE7, there are typically 3 major issues with the game, so I'm just going to go down the list in order of how much each of these bother me. First up is the enemy variety, or should I say, the lack thereof. A lot of people don't like how you're just fighting molded throughout the whole game. There are like 3 types, and that's it. I mean, there are also the bees, but nobody likes the bees. Now, personally speaking, I would definitely like there to be more enemy types in the game, but I actually don't mind the molded that much because I really like their designs, concept, and I think they're pretty fun to shoot. Resident Evil 7 fans, when the black gunk in the McDonald's restroom starts moving. Issue number 2, Unskippable cutscenes. This one is not only huge, it's baffling. I don't understand why a game released in 2017 doesn't let you skip cutscenes. I thought that horrible cliche, trope, whatever you want to call it, died a decade ago. And out of every game it had to be in, of course it had to be in a game in a series that is well known for immense replay value. 7's replayability is hurt so much by this simple mistake. Specifically with the opening segment of the game, it takes like 20 minutes to actually get to the main house and start playing the game for real. I know that Village's opening is a little long too, but at least you can skip cutscenes in that game and you can actually start shooting stuff like 5 minutes in. Issue number 3, the finale. I know Resi games are known for sorta dipping in quality towards the end, but this one takes it to a whole nother level and it freaking flies off the rails and kills everybody, including my dog. I'll save the huge rant for a countdown or something, but everything after the last Jack fight is, simply put, terrible. The choice of who to give the last COVID vaccine in the universe to is dumb, and the obviously correct option is so much better than the other one that they shouldn't have even bothered. And the boat completely exposes every one of those other issues that the game had, on top of being an uninteresting and boring area to explore. It put such a bad taste in my mouth that it almost soiled my first playthrough of the game. I followed that up with the mines, which seemed like an awesome and fresh new area that ends up being wasted potential because it's just an enemy gauntlet in a game that only has 3 enemies. In my opinion, Village's problems are more plentiful, but aren't nearly as severe as the ones I mentioned for 7. A 7 would no doubt be like top 3 in the whole series for me if it wasn't for these problems and the terrible final act. Granted, on my other 2 playthroughs, the boat wasn't as bad, but that's only because I knew where I had to go. Actually exploring this place for the first time, nope, that was a chore. So when there's somebody out there who says that they don't like 7 because of these problems, I can't really blame them. Oh, trust me, this game gets plenty of unjust criticism thrown its way, but if somebody doesn't like it because of this, then that's pretty fair. Village doesn't have anything as bad as this. Throughout the whole video, I've sort of said all of the bad stuff I have to say about the game. Anyway, while all that is pretty disappointing and makes me want to die, I think it's about time I closed off the video with one last segment. So now I'm just going to mention some of the extra stuff in both of the games. Starting off, 7 has the extra Madhouse difficulty, which I really like. See, it doesn't simply make the game harder, it actually restructures it as well. Like, when you see that one of the freaking keys is locked behind an antique coin cage, you know you're in for some fun. My favorite aspect of this mode is how there are more antique coins to find and more upgrades to purchase because of that. Add items having changed locations and limited saving, and yeah, this is a pretty great hard mode. So you might be wondering, what does Village do for its extra hard Village of Shadows difficulty? Well, basically all of the enemies become damage sponges and kill you in 2 hits. So there are 2 methods of playing this mode. Either play it on a fresh save and be miserable the whole time because everything takes 20 billets to kill. Billets? Because everything takes 20 billets. I said billets again. Because everything takes 20 bullets to kill, or play it on New Game Plus with overpowered weapons, completely killing the point of it being a hard difficulty in the first place. The only fun thing about it is that enemies drop a ton of money, so you can upgrade your newly obtained post-game weapons quicker, but, yeah. Yeah, that's it. Village of Shadows, more like Village of cringe. Also, 7 has a lot of DLC, but while it's great, especially if you get it on sale, I don't think it's really fair to bring it up yet because Village hasn't gotten any DLC yet. If I'm not mistaken, there's going to be some down the line, but probably not anytime soon. At least it has the Mercenaries, which I gotta say is ridiculously fun until it essentially just becomes, I'm only doing this because I want to become a true Jedi. And while 7 has so many fun unlockables due to the sheer variety, I'm not gonna lie, that lightsaber is really damn cool. When I initially had the idea of this video, I honestly thought that I had completely decided on my answer. That answer was going to be Village due to it not having the huge downsides of 7 while still being a great time. But I played both of them some more and I ultimately decided that I think 7 wins. I loved playing through both of these games and they're still neck and neck, but the sheer high points of 7 were truly spectacular after it had been so long since I played a truly great and engaging game. But I will still applaud Village for being just as engaging, it's just that 7 holds up better overall. I really do wish that last hour or so wasn't so bad though. My first playthrough of Village was fun beginning to end, but for 7, that boat was a major yikes. And now with all that said, I wouldn't really be surprised if my opinion on these two games flip-flopped. I could prefer either of them any day of the week, it just depends on what I'm in the mood for. And that's what makes these games so great. I've practically rammed it into your skull by this point, but they're as similar as they are different, so there are plenty of positive traits that they share, and plenty of others that are unique to one of them. And that's part of why I love these two games so much. Anyway, I'm Luggo the Luggician, and thank you very much for watching.